Good evening, I'm Andre De Jager. Tonight I will be doing an exclusive interview with Sean Achilleos. Good evening, Sean.
Good evening.
When did you write your first poem and what inspires you?
Well, when I was a youngster in my teens, I used to work in my dad's shop. He used to be a shopkeeper. And I always used to sort of like unpack the stock and keep all the cardboard boxes from the stock that I unpacked, etc., etc. And I used to take these cardboard boxes and whenever the shop was quiet and I had a moment, I just used to scribble on these pages and on these, basic empty cartons of cigarettes and things like that. And I just used to scribble on it after unpacking the stock. And that I just did in my own time. And I think what also basically inspired me was in my teens when I actually purchased an album called Parallel Lines by Blondie. And on the inner sleeve of the cover there was a poem called, it was actually called Parallel Lines. And I read the poem and it really inspired me. It really made me think, wow, I can maybe write something too. Maybe I've also got something to say in an indirect way, perhaps.
And what made you decide to publish your poetry as an ebook?
Well, I've been posting my poems on social media sites for quite some time now. And I've always received feedback from, if you want to call it a fan base, I've always received feedback from people saying, why don't you publish your work? And I never actually really thought of publishing my poetry. And then one day I thought, well, everybody keeps on saying, telling me to publish it, so why not?
How does your songwriting differ from your poetry?
It's a completely different approach. I think with songwriting you're a little bit more limited because you've got to remember that whatever you're writing, you've got to put music to it. So sometimes you've got to shorten a lyric or a sentence because you need to do that in order to edit it to blend with the music. Whereas with poetry I think you're a little bit more free to say what you want to say without having to shorten the sentence or anything like that just for the sake of having to balance it with the music. Even though I do love both, I love songwriting, I love poetry, but they're two different approaches for me completely. It's not the same thing.
And how is your poetry different from normal poetry?
Well, I think when a person uses the term normal poetry, I would sort of like maybe measure my poetry against mainstream poetry. So I would say my poetry is very philosophical, whereas a lot of other poetry that I've read always has, a balanced kind of rhyme in the poetry. It's sort of like every second sentence rhymes. Whereas I don't necessarily write like that. I can't say short stories, but I always say that my poetry is, you need to have a sense of identification because you're either going to identify with my poem or you're not going to. You're either going to get it or you're not. So that's my style of writing. It's philosophical and sometimes I write very indirect.
And what can we expect in the future? Are you going to publish more philosophical poetry or can we expect a more story-based book?
Well, I would like my next work to be a book, an actual book, a story-based book as you've put it. And I would like to write a true-to-life love story, which I think is better. I like writing. I'm not a fiction writer. I don't think I could ever be a fiction writer. But I would like to write a true-life love story because, as they say, the truth is stranger than fiction.
Well, Sean, did you enjoy your bubbly candlelight bath?
Oh, absolutely. I feel very refreshed. It was good.
Awesome, bro. Awesome. Well, Sean, a couple of more questions that I would like to ask you.
Cool.
What do you see yourself as, a singer, songwriter, or a poet, or a painter?
Well, it's difficult to sort of like put myself in a box and say I'm a singer or I'm a poet or I'm a songwriter or painter or whatever. I see myself as a hybrid person. I think I have many different interests. I cannot say that I'm one or the other because I enjoy all of them. I think years ago people were very strict about identification. You know, they said that if you're a singer or a performing artist, you had to have a certain identity so that people can pick up on your identity and say this is who you are, or this is your sound or your style. But I'm very different in that respect. I'm very multifaceted. So I can't really pinpoint either one and say that this is what I am. I'm all of them.
And how has your style of writing changed over the years?
Well, my style of songwriting and my style of poetry has changed over the years because I think when I was younger, I was a very timid writer. I was very afraid to express myself because I was always, afraid of what people might think of my writing or what they might, that people might reject it or that sort of thing. And what happened to me when I was younger, I used to write these heavy love songs. And a lot of people used to say to me, but you're too young to write songs like these. And it's almost like the songs that I wrote when I was in my teens and in my 20s only really resonate with me now. So sometimes I read those lyrics and I think, wow, what was I thinking? Because I wasn't going through a lot of, I wasn't, the experiences were limited because I was so young. But I would say as I've gotten older, my writing is more, I've become more bold in my writing, more expressive, and I say what I like, and if somebody doesn't like it and it doesn't resonate with them, then tough luck.
Mm-hmm. And how do you balance having a musical career versus a writing career?
Well, I don't really find that I need to balance anything really because when you have a musical career, you've got to go out and perform. You've got to do gigs, and with writing, it's different because when you're writing, you don't have so many deadlines. You don't have to go out and perform gigs at certain places. You do that when you do music. But writing you do at home, and you publish it or you post it on social networks and people read it, or you do whatever you like with it. So I would say it's not as hard work as a musical career. It's still hard work, don't get me wrong, but it's not quite as exhausting as going out and performing. Mm-hmm. That's the difference.
And relating to your work, what makes you most happy?
Most happy? I would say, as I mentioned earlier, probably when people can resonate with my work, when there's a sense of identification. I would say identification is the key word. If somebody listens to my songs or read one of my poems and they give me feedback and they say, wow, that touched me, or I can relate to that, or I listened to your song or I read your poems and I can relate to it, that makes me happy. Because if you reach even just that one person, it's amazing. It's an amazing feeling when somebody says, your music has touched me. I can share a little story with that. I once wrote a song and I went to the studio to actually have it recorded. And the day that I was in the studio, I took the lyrics and I actually pinned them up in the studio on the actual music stand because I was practicing, I was rehearsing the song. And when I left the studio, I actually forgot them there. I left them in the studio. but by accident. And then a couple of days later, the owner from the studio actually phoned me and he said to me, you know, I have an amazing story to share with you. And I said, what? And he said, I don't know if you're aware of this, but you actually forgot your song lyrics, your music sheets at the studio. And I said, yes, you know, I only realized afterwards. And he said, but there was a guy that came into the studio and he was painting the studio. So he was standing on a step ladder, and while he was painting, he looked down and he actually started reading the lyrics to your song. And I said, yes, and he said, I just caught this guy standing there, sort of like looking down at the music sheets and reading your song, and he looked like he was sort of a little bit entranced. So I went over to him and I said to him, "Are you all right?" And this guy replied and said, you know, he shared something very personal about his own life, and he said he was actually thinking, contemplating taking his own life, and nobody knew that. He said, but just while he was painting, he was contemplating and thinking of how he was going to take his own life. And as he was painting, he looked down at my song, the lyrics to this specific song, and he read them, and that changed his mind. And that to me was something awesome, and which I think is great, if I could touch people in a way that, you know, that, through my songs, through my paintings, through my poetry, that to me is what really makes me the most happy.
Well, thank you very much, Sean.
It's a pleasure.
Hope to see more wonderful projects out there.
Absolutely.
Well, I'm Andre De Jager. Catch you on the flip side. Good night.
Cheers.
Cheers.